Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Coffee with Carl. I am your host, Carl Zoellner. I am one of the attorneys here with Anderson Business Advisors, and as you can see, I got my coffee today. As you may have guessed, today's subject is bank accounts. Get a lot of questions on bank accounts. Where's the best place to set them up? Does it have to be in the state where the entity's at? So I wanted to go into a little bit of detail on how and why we make the suggestions we do when it's considering bank account. So first thing I want to talk about was that bank accounts are, in the best case scenario, are set up in the state where the entity is set up where you're using them. Now, with the proliferation of online banking and banks, being everywhere, it has become less of a factor than it used to be, because normally when we talk about bank accounts and their relevancy, having them is far more important than where they're located. Now, I say that because when we used to talk about where bank accounts need to be located, it is the gold standard to have them set up with routing numbers in the state where they are. Most relevant, I would say, for say our Wyoming entities, that would be great. Now, the practicality aspect of actually getting and setting up a bank account in Wyoming can be a bit more complex. So we work from the reality side of it and say it's more important to have a bank account than where it's located. So just to answer the initial question on the front end as well is, why would I need to set up a bank account in the state where the entity was located? It comes down to where the situs or where the business has footing. So say if you were to be sued, I lived in Texas, and I had a Wyoming holding company, and my bank account was set in Texas. It is a factor in determining where the real location or where that company is actually doing business. Now, with our corporate headquarters, the argument almost becomes null and void and almost irrelevant where the bank account is. So that's why our general suggestion is it's more important to get the bank account set up than where you get it set up. The importance is really, I want at the beginning and the end of the day for each of my LLCs to be treated as different entities. So I would expect each of those entities to have different bank accounts. Now, I usually, for the folks I sit with and meet, we usually talk about, Burger King and McDonald's are obviously two separate businesses. Would I expect both of them to have separate bank accounts? Of course. So when we go into court, if for some reason you get sued, we want to say, look, they had separate bank accounts. I'm treating them as separate and distinct businesses, and I'm showing the entities the respect and they deserve. So we rely on the court to do the same. So really the separation between your assets, even from the business side, has to do with treating them as separate. So that's another reason why we actually need bank accounts and why the location isn't quite so relevant as actually having them. Now, the other thing when we're talking about from the reality side of this whole deal is that even if you say went to Wyoming and set up a bank account or found a bank that said they could set up a Wyoming bank account with a routing number, the reality is half the time the banks screw it up anyways. Meaning, even if I specifically requested a Wyoming bank account, probably better than half the amount of time they'll still set it up with the wrong routing number, or they'll just set it up in the state I'm in anyways, because unfortunately that's just sort of the way banks are, and the bankers you work with sort of do it that way too. Either that or you're working with a business banker, they've assigned out the actual account set up to somebody else, and the somebody else just sets it up where they're used to setting it up. Because it's interesting too, on the kind of the behind the scenes portion of the bank side, they actually have different systems for different states. So when you go into a local, say someplace where you live, so using my original scenario, let's say Texas, they have a Texas system versus a Wyoming system versus a North Carolina system versus a New York system. And so a lot of the times those people don't even know. They're just more interested in saying yes and getting you set up anyways. So for those of you out there who manage to have Wyoming bank accounts or live in Wyoming, it's great. But remember, the real takeaway here is it's more important to have a bank account for each of your entities so that when you make the argument that the entities are distinct businesses, say if something happens on one property and they're trying to merge all of your business together, the bank account's the most important piece. Where the bank account's set up has gotten to be substantially less important, like I said, given the way that everything's done online these days, and there are so many other options out there. I think eventually, my opinion is eventually everything from banking will basically be done online in the future and just have basically little storefronts. So until that day comes, remember, bank account, not so important where the bank account's set up. Once again, thanks for joining me for another Coffee with Carl. Please access all of our free content. Toby and Clint and Michael put out great material, more in-depth and advanced strategies. I wanted to set this up so we all had a chance to talk about some of the basics, because a lot of those questions do come up on a daily basis. So until next time, it was a pleasure once again, and we'll catch you on the next Coffee with Carl. Thanks.